Right, welcome to another conversation and another very interesting speaker that I want to introduce to you just in a second. But I want to welcome everyone to the conversation on data-driven DEI. And my intention is to explore the connection between data and decision making in DEI. And for that specific reason, I am joined by my fantastic guest, Carol. Caroline, hello. Nice to see you.
Great to be here.
And great to have you here as well. So, for the audience knowledge, so Caroline is the head of client experience for the EMEA region. Caroline is with the Franklin Templeton company. Our beloved friend Franklin has been with Diversity Up for a long time. So, I'm happy we'll continue on this path. So, how are you, Caroline? How are you today?
I'm great. I'm looking forward to the session and I wish you all well for the conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I really hope our conversation will trigger a new way of thinking and inspire a lot of individuals as organization to be more data driven in DI. It's obviously an ambition for a lot of organizations, but it's also a big challenge for a lot of organizations. So really my hope is that we will trigger some new thinking around this subject. So let's start from the beginning, at the beginning of the journey of your unique project. I would say I know that you have rolled out a pioneering project on data collection, on the collection of ethnicity data in your company. So I'm really curious to hear what was the driver behind the decision, and then maybe your personal why behind making the decision on this specific project.
Yeah, so we at Franklin Templeton, we saw data as really the cornerstone of our D&I strategy. We wanted to look at having an increased understanding of the representation across our business from a diversity perspective. And we also wanted to be able to then use that data to measure our D&I progress. And that was to ensure that we're creating a fairer and more equitable organization for everyone at the company. And sitting within asset management data, we're very familiar with using data for a lot of initiatives. And when we're looking at the data, one of the key uses is to then look at the level of inclusion by subgroups. So we weren't just interested in the diversity aspect, it's really also about inclusion. Inclusion is just such an important part of Franklin Templeton. And through our employee engagement surveys, the Office of D&I, they will look at the data, they look at whether there's any differentials between genders or ethnicity where that data is being collected to really understand employees' lived experience of working at Franklin Templeton and where there may be any differences. The other key driver for us was that we were seeing increasing requests from clients and consultants who wanted to understand our D&I strategy and also wanted to understand the composition of our workforce. So we were driven then to look at capturing this data to really align with our client needs.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that also client was the other trigger for this project. So the client actually requested or required data or DI data from you. Okay, interesting.
Yes, and we're
Um,
also starting to see that regulators and governments are starting to require us to provide the data as well, and we need to be ready for that. So it was getting ourselves ready to meet those obligations as well.
I understand. So so if we can just dig deeper into the maybe some of the concrete actions and outcomes that you achieved within the project, could you share a bit more about the specific actions or outcomes that you achieved as a result?
Yeah. So we had set a threshold of capturing 65% of data as being representative of the organization. We were delighted to see that 75% of employees had responded as part of the 2 month campaign. And what we did to do that was we undertook a mixed media campaign. We undertook town halls, we had videos, we had an intranet presence, we had scheduled hours where our employees could come and meet with members of the project to
Mhm.
ask any questions, have their concerns raised, and we walked through that with the employees. We then had a group of ambassadors, employee ambassadors, as part of the campaign. Those ambassadors were from across ethnicities, across seniority levels, individuals, leaders, across people who were new to the organization and those that had been at the organization for quite some time. And across the business, we wanted to make sure that we had broad representation from
Mhm.
across the business. And then we spent time explaining to employees how we were going to use the data, how their data was going to be stored and captured, and really building that trust with employees
Mhm.
so that they could feel comfortable in sharing their data with the company.
Mhm. So what you're saying is that, as I understood, that communication was part of the success, one of the success factors in the project. Like, and you spend a lot of time and effort on like making sure that it's well taken care of, right?
Absolutely. So we were very intentional on launching a change management and communication strategy. And we knew that we had to build trust and that we were going to need to build trust over time, and to explain what the campaign was about and how we were capturing the information and how it was going to be used. So that communication strategy, that change management strategy was absolutely vital to the
Mhm.
success of the campaign. And the great
Mhm.
thing was that we iterated as we got feedback in from employees, and we adjusted before we then implemented the solution.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
having that interaction with employees throughout the process was absolutely critical.
Mhm. And if we could be just even more detailed on the subject, and I'm particularly interested in the communication piece, um, I really wonder, how did you brand the project, or like how did you sell the project to the employees? I understand that this type of project or this type of projects are can be quite sensitive to people, like we're talking like data, personal data, so you're dealing with a very sensitive material, and by default uh, you can bring some level of resistance or mistrust. So how what kind of messages did you send to the organization that you have achieved such a high engagement level with the survey? You mentioned that you exceed the expected 65%. So what was the selling point?
Well, as I said, we had identified campaign ambassadors from across the
Mhm.
organization. So they really helped us with that communication strategy. We also had members of our distribution teams who shared in the town halls, what clients were asking um,
Mhm.
from us, why the clients wanted the information. Client employees had also been quite engaged on the topic. We do know that there can be resistance over time, and we spent the time really helping employees to understand how we were going to use the data, that the data was only going to be viewed by a small group of people, particularly at an individual level, a very small group of people, that the data would not be visible to line managers, that it was in our system and that they could access it very easily, very quickly. They had no obligation to actually or they
Participate.
weren't, should I say, they weren't mandated to provide their data, but that there was value to the organization and to them as we looked at it from an inclusive perspective. And for employees, it was the ability that they could have to choose prefer not to say, or they could revoke their consent at any time in terms of capturing the data. So it was very much a conversation with employees around the value to them as we looked at what is that representation for Franklin Templeton, and that we were very much focused on inclusion and not
Mm,
just in terms of capturing data.
sure, sure. And in addition to that, a high level of transparency in that communication, as you mentioned. Um, so I wonder, like, since you are where you are with your project, like, how is data being used? Like, how is this data that you collected facilitating the decision making for stakeholders? Can we talk a little bit about that?
So we've been using the first part of the project, should I say, was around capturing the data. We're now using the data within our systems. We're mapping our US ethnicity data alongside our UK ethnicity data. We're so that we are in a position to be able to provide that to clients where they want a combined view of our ethnicity data. So that's a piece of work that we're going through. And we're also then working with our talent acquisition team. They have extended the sources for candidates. So when they're sourcing candidates, they broadened out where they source those candidates from. We've engaged on the early careers program. So that's our summer internship program and our futures program, which is our graduate program. We're building out our pipeline through that. We are also now capturing ethnicity as part of the recruitment process, and the intention will be that we will look at those experiences by ethnicity through the recruitment cycle. And
Mhm.
our talent acquisition team are also working with hiring managers to help them through those processes. And then, as I said, importantly, we're using the data then to be able to respond to clients.
Mhm. And what is in client's mind? Like, what drives a client to request such data? Like, what's your view on that?
Yeah, so clients are seeing, and distributors are very much seeing that there is this transfer of wealth from previous generations to new generations, and the newer generations are more diverse. So they're wanting to ensure that the that where DNI is important to them, that the asset management companies that they work with are aligned with their DNI priorities. So it's very much driven from them in terms of, as I said, their own client base being much more
Mhm.
diverse than previous generations.
Mhm. Mhm. I understand. Okay. Um, Last but not least, I'm conscious of the limited time that we have, but I think it's valid also to explore a bit on the potential of this project. Obviously, part of the organization has gone through the project. As you said, 75% of employees responded to the project. How would you evaluate the potential, the opportunities of the project and a more expansive rollout, like in other locations within your company?
Yeah, so the solution that we implemented wasn't just for ethnicity, but to capture self ID data. And the principles are transferable to other diversity dimensions. In the UK, we can use the framework to respond to the requirements of the regulator, the FCA. across diversity dimensions. The approach will also help us as we prepare for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in Europe, which will be looking at gender and disability. And then when we're reviewing the CFA DEI code in Australia, that looks at representation in investment management. So the framework that we put in place, the governance around it, the governing body that we put in place on the back of the project will help us in a number of different areas, different dimensions, and across different countries.
Mhm.
So it is important for us to continue to monitor the external environment. What are our clients asking of us? What are regulators asking of us? And what will governments require us to do? And then for us to be ready to do that.
Mhm. Wonderful. Well, fingers crossed for the success of the project across the company. I think you did a fantastic job, and hopefully, your story and your successes will inspire other organizations and leaders to maybe be less terrified about data and look at the data as a as an opportunity rather than a fear factor. So that's also my wish
Absolutely.
for every single listener of our conversation. And I hope to continue this conversation with you, Caroline, at some point to check how you're doing on the project.
Great. Thank you and
Wonderful.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.